How's it going today, guys? In today's episode, I'm going to talk about my first trip to Puerto Rico that took place in late 2022 and ended in the beginning of 2023. I was there for about 3.5, maybe 4 months. And my life before the trip to Puerto Rico was pretty common. I lived in a small town my whole life, and I've never been outside of the state of Washington, besides one time when I went to Idaho to visit family. But other than that, I've lived in the same area basically my whole entire life. And I've never even flown a plane. It was my first time flying a plane in 2022. My hobbies were at the time basically just photographing cemeteries and looking at old abandoned farmhouses and stuff like that. And that's what my channel was based around. If you look back at my channel for like the first 50 or so episodes. But then I went to Puerto Rico and discovered how much I loved the cemeteries in Puerto Rico. And so that created a whole nother hobby for me to tackle while I was on the island. I'm pretty lucky that I went with two of my best friends when I went on my first trip to Puerto Rico, because I probably wouldn't have made it otherwise. I remember getting out of the airport and taking an Uber to San Juan and walking around and really just being overwhelmed by how different it was for me. Coming from an old small town that has, 500 to 1,500 people at any given time, and then going to San Juan, it's quite the difference. And even the first place that I tried to get some food at, I had a lot of problems because I only know how to speak English. So I couldn't even order food at the first place that I went to. So I just kind of walked out of the store nervously, not knowing what else to do because I couldn't communicate. And it was all my fault, but that wasn't a good way to start for me because it made me wonder how I was going to fare throughout the whole rest of the trip. But luckily, throughout time, I picked up on a few things, and quite a few people speak English on the island as well, so I was able to adapt just fine in the end. Me and my friends ended up getting a spot on Morel Campos Street for a month in San Juan, and it was this really cool 3-bedroom apartment, but it didn't have any running water. We had to fill water up with using 5-gallon buckets from this container that they had on the roof that was kept warm because of the sunlight and whatnot. This is a big plastic container. I don't know how many gallons, but a lot. Enough to sustain life. And so every time we went to the bathroom, we were always going back outside and hauling gallons of water into the house to use the toilet. But the rent was so cheap, we couldn't complain being in paradise right there in the middle of the action. And another cool thing about living on the Morel Campos Street was that it was right by one of Santurce's main cemeteries that I enjoyed visiting quite a bit. And you'll see the cemetery on my YouTube channel plenty of times if you've watched my channel for long enough. When I went to Old San Juan for the first time with my friends, I wasn't really interested in anything besides looking at the cemetery that was by the castle there in Old San Juan. And so I ended up spending all day there, and my friends just kind of had to leave and go do their own thing and go shopping and sightsee and whatnot. I didn't really have anything else I wanted to see more or any place I wanted to be more than in the cemetery there in Old San Juan. And that kind of sparked a obsession for me when I was originally going to Puerto Rico, my plan was to just spend a month there in general and walk around the coastline of the island as much as I can. I knew on the southwest side there would be trouble because of all the military installations and whatnot, but I figured I could just walk around those areas and still basically do a loop around the island. But once I discovered how many amazing cemeteries they had in Puerto Rico, I quickly had to change my plans because photographing these cemeteries was going to take a lot more time than just walking through the island. So it was after the first week in San Juan that I started developing a plan on how I was going to walk from San Juan to Aguada and photograph as many cemeteries as I could along the way. Now, keep in mind, I didn't come with very much money, so walking from San Juan to Aguada, I knew I wasn't going to be able to get even a single Airbnb, and I was going to have to sleep outside. And at the time, I wasn't really sure how I was going to sleep outside. Was I going to sleep at the beach? Was I going to use my tent and just try to hide somewhere? I hadn't fully developed my plan yet, but it definitely made me anxious during the final weeks in San Juan, knowing that that walk was coming anytime. That month in Puerto Rico that I spent in San Juan was such a learning experience for me, though, just adapting to the climate and the culture and the chaos and the noise. I really came to love it at the end. You're definitely not lonely in San Juan. It's full of noise and people and music and cars and motorcycles and cats and chickens and dogs and everything in between. And I had a really good time just walking up and down the neighborhoods, even though I was still getting used to it, and my anxiety was pretty high a lot of times, I won't lie, especially during that first month. So it wasn't until about 2, maybe 3 weeks into my 1 month stay in San Juan when I realized that I was for sure going to walk from San Juan to Isabela. So I spent the last 10 days or so walking through the streets of Bayamon and Santurce to get ready and prepare for this adventure that I was about to embark on. And I remember when I left how nervous I was, thinking about how I was going to have to get to the other side of the island with no money for an Airbnb. And the first night I walked through Bayamon and up to the north coast, and I almost made it to Dorado before it started getting dark. So I slept outside on the beach, which was a horrible mistake. I ended up getting eaten up by sand mites, and I woke up and all my stuff was wet because I've never slept next to the ocean before, and I didn't realize how wet and damp it was going to be. And a funny story I had that night while I was laying there, and I literally got like a hour and a half of sleep that first night, and the next morning and I was wondering how I was going to do this if I just wasn't going to be able to sleep, because just random things kept happening. A stray dog ran up to me when I was almost asleep and woke me up, and then there was this moment where I thought there were some kind of sea monsters coming out of the ocean towards me. And once they got close enough to me, I realized it was just a couple people riding their horses down the beach. But it was dark out, so I could barely see them, and that really threw me off. At that point, I was standing up, and I had my backpack on my back, so I was just really nervous and paranoid after a long first day of walking, getting through Bayamon and stuff. But it ended up getting a lot better. So I would walk into Dorado the next morning, and that was the first cemetery that I ended up documenting on this particular walk. It was called the Cementerio Municipal de Dorado. And I kind of just walked in and talked to the lady that was managing the place, and she let me go in there and take some pictures. And I made a friend. I ran into this guy that was cleaning his mother's gravestone. And I talked to him for a while, and that's when I started to realize that this was really going to be a fun adventure, and I was going to meet a lot of people and learn a lot of stuff. And the problem was I was using my phone. I just had a cheap little Android phone because my channel was at the infancy stage during this time, and I had a battery charger that I had with me as well, but I started running into problems keeping my phone charged. So after I got done documenting the cemetery, I ended up looking around in search of a plug-in, and Burger King seemed to be my safety net on this walk. So I eventually went to Burger King and ended up charging my phone, and then I found a park in Dorado, and I ended up narrating an episode for my YouTube channel and doing a bunch of stuff like that. And by the time I was done with everything, it got dark, so I knew I had to find somewhere to sleep instead of going back to the ocean, because I never wanted to sleep by the ocean ever again after my first night. And luckily, I was walking down the street just wondering, what the heck am I going to do? And I found an old concrete bench. And it turns out in Puerto Rico, they used to have a bus system back in the day that took you all around the island, and they have these concrete benches set up everywhere throughout the island, especially on the coastlines. And so I slept on that bench, and I actually got a good 4 or 5 hours of sleep. And I was like, okay, from this point on, I am going to look for these concrete benches, and that's what I'm going to sleep on from now on. And so I woke up that next morning ready to leave Dorado, and I started walking. And right as the sun started coming up, I was getting into the next town, Vega Baja. And it was just amazing walking into Vega Baja as the sun's coming up, because, you know, Puerto Rico is a really beautiful place, and there's a lot there. And I remember my spirits being so high at that exact moment as I was walking into Vega Baja, and I couldn't wait to go find the cemetery there. So I went to Vega Baja and made it to the cemetery there, and the lady that worked at the cemetery was really nice and welcoming, and she took me around the place and gave me like a tour. And it was called the Cementerio Municipal de Vega Baja, and there's a little historical cemetery that I went to there as well. And I just remember it being a great experience. The cemetery in Vega Baja is a really amazing cemetery. So I spent all day there taking pictures and working on an episode for my YouTube channel, and making sure my phone was charged and that I ate and dealt with all that. And I found a bench and went to sleep. And the next day or two, to be honest with you guys, was kind of a blur to me. I remember walking down Highway 22, and I completely missed the town of Manatee, which was unfortunate, but I rectify me missing that later on during my first trip in Puerto Rico, and I'll tell you guys about that in a later episode. So anyways, I walked past Manatee on Highway 22, and then I ended up getting onto Highway 2 and making it all the way to Arecibo. And Arecibo was a really amazing town to visit as well. And I remember just being absolutely beaten up, and on day 3 or 4 at this point, without taking a shower or anything like that. I was just walking and laying down and sleeping on a bench somewhere and getting up and walking, looking for the next cemetery, looking for the next Burger King to charge my phone and whatnot. So when I made it to Arecibo, I was really excited because there was a lot there, including an absolutely amazing cemetery. This seems like a good stopping point for my first episode of this series of me talking about my adventures in Puerto Rico. I have plenty more to come because it was an interesting time, that first trip, and my second trip was even more interesting in a lot of ways, and I have so much to tell you guys, probably a couple hours of me talking, so look forward to more episodes like this coming up in the future on my YouTube channel. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you next time.